Welcome to The Critique. Today we're diving into a submission about rewriting limiting childhood money stories to achieve early career success. Integrating spiritual wealth practices with practical career advice risks alienating pragmatic readers if the psychological mechanisms aren't clearly defined.
Yeah, I am really glad we're starting right there. Because, this material takes a huge swing. The author is trying to tackle the internal psychological relationship a person has with money before giving them this whole checklist of external career moves.
Right.
And honestly, that's the right instinct. But the execution right now, well, it leaves a pretty massive gap.
A completely massive gap. When I was reading the sections about shifting your internal state, practices like setting morning intentions to be a magnet for money, or like bowing to the goddess Lakshmi, or even verbally saying thank you every time you pay a cell phone bill, I just couldn't help but cringe a little bit on behalf of a certain type of reader.
You mean the purely pragmatic reader? Like the person who opens this just looking for a straightforward way out of debt?
Exactly. Yeah. If you're a 23-year-old staring down $40,000 in student loan debt and, your chest is tight because inflation is eating your paycheck, someone telling you to just thank a penny on the street to manifest wealth, it feels incredibly out of touch.
Right, I get that.
I'd argue it almost borders on toxic positivity. The weakness here is that the author relies so heavily on mystical framing that it completely bypasses the tactical reality of the reader. It just feels disconnected from the actual acute stress of financial scarcity. But I do have a question about this. Does focusing purely on the energy of money inadvertently bypass the tactical steps needed to overcome immediate hurdles like student loan debt and inflation?
Oh, absolutely it does, at least the way it's written now. And if the material doesn't bridge that divide, the reader's going to close the book by chapter 2. So the suggestion here is to anchor these gratitude and manifestation exercises explicitly as tools for nervous system regulation and cognitive reframing.
Okay, cognitive reframing.
Yeah, we have to show the reader the actual biology of what is happening. We need to explain how these practices pull the brain out of a primal survival state so it can actually, recognize real-world opportunities.
Hold on, let me push back on that for just a second. If I'm broke and panicking about my rent, how does saying thank you to a utility bill regulate my nervous system? Because, I'm still broke.
Because it acts as a deliberate psychological pattern interrupt. When someone is trapped in financial scarcity, their amygdala is totally hijacked.
Right, they're in fight or flight.
Exactly. They are operating in pure fight or flight mode, and the text even mentions this. It describes the literal shallow breathing people experience when checking their bank accounts. So when you're in that state, your brain is entirely focused on the immediate threat.
Wow, okay.
By forcing yourself to say thank you, you are initiating a cognitive reappraisal. You are physically forcing the nervous system to shift from sympathetic panic, that fight or flight state, into a parasympathetic calm.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Because when you achieve that parasympathetic calm, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for logical problem solving, that turns back on.
Yes, 100%. You aren't saying thank you to magically summon money from the ether. You are saying thank you to calm your physical body down enough so that you can actually think of a cohesive business strategy. The author just needs to frame it that way.
Let's apply that to probably the most jarring anecdote in this entire submission, because the author talks about finding a 1945 wheat penny on the subway stairs that turned out to be worth $4,000.
Oh man, yeah.
Right. And the text frames this discovery as the direct result of an intention-setting experiment where they repeated the phrase, "I am a magnet for money."
Yeah, that part made me stop and reread it a few times, honestly.
Because the limitation of presenting that purely as a magical manifestation is that it makes the author sound like a lucky outlier. It makes the advice entirely unreplicable. A reader can't put find a rare antique penny on the stairs into their Google Calendar as a career strategy.
No, they can't. Which is why the author needs to reposition this entire anecdote. Like, instead of presenting it as magic, frame it as a masterclass in training the brain's Reticular Activating System, the RAS.
The RAS, okay, explain how you would write that into the text for a layperson. I've always thought of the RAS as kind of like the brain's spam filter.
That is actually the perfect analogy, and the text should absolutely use it. You are bombarded with millions of pieces of sensory data every single second. Your RAS decides what gets through to your conscious mind and what gets deleted.
Right.
So when a brain is stressed and driven by scarcity, its RAS deletes everything except immediate threats. It gives you extreme tunnel vision. So by setting the intention that money comes to me abundantly, the author wasn't magically altering the physical universe to place a $4,000 penny on the subway stairs.
Right. The penny was already there.
Exactly. The penny was already there.
Wow, okay, so what they actually did was deliberately programmed their spam filter to stop deleting hidden opportunities. They taught their brain to spot overlooked value that a panicked mind would have completely ignored.
Yes, and that is a highly practical, scientifically grounded, deeply actionable skill. You aren't manifesting a penny, you are reprogramming your brain's spam filter. If the author explicitly connects the spiritual intention of the exercise to the biological mechanism of the RAS, the pragmatic reader won't just stay engaged, they will be taking furious notes.
That's a massive improvement. Okay, moving from the internal to the external. Recommending generosity to individuals experiencing acute financial scarcity lacks actionable clarity if the mechanics of non-financial giving aren't explicitly broken down.
This section was so fascinating because it builds directly on that newly established internal abundance. Once the reader has regulated their nervous system, the text urges them to externalize that abundance by being generous.
Yeah, moving from helplessness to helpfulness by giving away their time and energy, even if they have $0.
Right, exactly.
I struggled with this a bit. I mean, it's like telling someone with an empty cup to pour a drink for someone else. How do we ensure this advice doesn't just sound like a recipe for early career burnout? Because the premise sounds nice on paper, but telling someone who is in extreme poverty, crashing on their sister's couch, to just be generous feels off.
Yeah, that's a very fair concern.
It's like telling someone who is actively drowning to act as a lifeguard. They physically don't have the oxygen to save anyone else yet. I just worry it leads to exploitation.
And that fear is definitely exacerbated by the anchor example the author uses to illustrate the concept. Because to demonstrate broke generosity, the text highlights someone securing a massive NASDAQ billboard in Times Square to interview high-level mentors like Gary Vee and Ryan Holiday for free.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I circled that example in red ink. Leveraging a massive corporate asset like a NASDAQ billboard to broker relationships is an incredible networking maneuver. Sure, but it relies on an extraordinary level of existing access.
Exactly.
To use that as your baseline example of what a broke person can do is a significant weakness. It makes the entire concept of generosity seem laughably out of reach for an early career seeker, truly starting from absolute zero.
It accidentally communicates that you need to hold the keys to Times Square to be considered helpful.
Right.
So to fix this, the suggestion is to explicitly define non-monetary generosity as tactical resourcefulness. The text must demonstrate precisely how an individual with literally zero connections can offer specific, high-energy labor using universally available tools.
Tactical resourcefulness. I like that phrasing so much better than broke generosity. And actually, there are a couple of concrete examples buried later in the text that achieve this brilliantly. They just need to be moved up and made the focal point. Take the anecdote about the restaurant hostess who received 3 job offers in one night.
I loved that story. That is the absolute perfect example to elevate.
Let's break down why it works so much better than the billboard example. The author should detail exactly how her generosity operated in a way anyone can replicate. She didn't have a multi-million-dollar corporate screen, She had a laminated menu.
Yeah.
Her generosity was simply bringing intense passion, joy, and deep product knowledge, like making proactive recommendations, to a standard everyday transaction.
And the text should explain why that works economically. It needs to tell the reader, look at corporate environments. They are full of exhausted, burnt-out executives.
Oh, totally.
So in that environment, youthful energy, unbridled enthusiasm, and proactive curiosity are actual tradable economic currencies. When that hostess gave her energy freely, she wasn't just being nice. She was executing a form of tactical resourcefulness that instantly separated her from everyone else in the room.
It shows the reader that their attention and their passion have market value. The other concrete example from the text that perfectly illustrates this is the video editor at the Hulu premiere for the show Deli Boys.
Oh, that is the ultimate, actionable form of tactical resourcefulness. I would urge the author to spend a whole page deconstructing this one event. Show the reader exactly how unsolicited, highly targeted helpfulness actually functions in the real world.
Right, because this editor didn't ask for permission. He just saw an influencer, Lily Singh, at the premiere, took a 2-second clip of her on his phone, and edited it on the spot for free.
He didn't charge her, he didn't require a billboard, and he didn't set up a formal meeting to ask how he could add value. He just used his existing skills and his initiative to solve a problem the subject didn't even know they had, in real time.
That's so smart.
If the author tweaks this section to frame generosity this way, as highly specific, low-barrier, unsolicited value creation, it shifts from feeling like a vague, exhausting moral obligation into a lethal career strategy.
That actually leads right into a major structural issue I hit a few pages later. The narrative arc between doing mundane survival work and pursuing one's true passion creates a jarring disconnect that leaves the actionable path forward somewhat muddled.
Yeah, the sudden shift in tone, right? We go from these incredibly dynamic, high-energy bursts of resourcefulness at Hulu premieres to the harsh, grinding reality of everyday work.
Exactly. The material suddenly introduces the reality of working a season of survival purely to build a financial foundation. The author talks about sending 1,000 cold emails offering to run social media accounts, or doing incredibly dry, unwanted LinkedIn consulting just to escape the sister's couch and pay rent.
It is a very pragmatic reality check.
It is. But it deeply conflicts with the manuscript's overarching theme up to this point. I mean, for chapters, the author has been preaching that you must perpetually bring explosive joy, passion, and spiritual alignment to your work in order to succeed.
Right.
And then suddenly they're saying, oh, also go send 1,000 soul-crushing cold emails to dentists about their LinkedIn profiles. I was genuinely confused. Those two ideas feel completely contradictory. But let me ask you this. Is the connection between mastering these temporary survival skills and actually healing those deep-seated childhood money wounds fully established, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
It absolutely needs bolstering. I had the exact same reaction as you. Right now, the text treats the season of survival almost like an unfortunate, embarrassing detour from the spiritual path of passion. But we can't just ignore it because it's real life.
Right.
So the suggestion here is to reconcile this tension by framing these temporary survival skills as deliberate strategic investments in courage and confidence that actively rewrite those limiting money stories.
So don't frame the unwanted hustle as a detour, frame it as the laboratory where the psychological healing actually takes place.
Precisely. Let's look at how the author handles the advice of what to do with an extra $1,000. The text briefly advises against looking for quick, easy money in crypto, which is smart, but then it just casually mentions throwing that $1,000 at a public speaking class or a writing coach.
It kind of glosses over it.
It completely glosses over it. The author needs to expand on this significantly. They need to explain why spending your last $1,000 on a writing coach is a survival tactic. Show the reader how mastering an unwanted or intimidating skill temporarily buys emotional freedom.
Oh, I see.
It's not just about learning how to speak in public. It's about the deliberate acquisition of competence. And here is the core psychological truth the text needs to hit. Competence breeds confidence, and that confidence acts as the ultimate antidote to financial anxiety.
Let me see if I can tie that directly back to the childhood money wounds introduced at the very beginning of the material. Because the author talks about growing up seeing parents fight viciously over money, or feeling the sting of earning £5 an hour stacking shelves in a grocery store.
Right, that is the root trauma the book is trying to solve.
So if we connect the dots, we can show how doing that boring, unglamorous LinkedIn consulting isn't just about paying the rent. It is the empirical proof of concept for the reader's own self-worth. It mathematically proves to their brain that they can generate income without suffering.
Yes. When the reader successfully trades a newly acquired skill like optimizing a LinkedIn page for money without exploiting anyone, And without burning themselves out stacking shelves for £5 an hour, they are proving to their own nervous system that their childhood story is false.
Wow.
They are proving that money can be generated cleanly through value creation.
That completely reframes the grind. The unglamorous season of survival isn't a failure of manifestation. It's actually the highest form of spiritual and psychological work because it provides the undeniable real-world evidence needed to overwrite the scarcity mindset once and for all.
Exactly. By making that connection explicit, the author closes the loop perfectly. They take the esoteric, therapy-speak concept of healing a childhood wound and give it a highly tactical, career-driven mechanism. It validates the reader's current struggle.
It really does.
It looks the reader in the eye and says, if you are currently grinding away at something you don't love just to build a foundation, you aren't failing at being aligned with your passion. You are actively in the trenches, doing the necessary work of proving your own value to yourself.
That is an incredibly empowering message, and it makes the entire book feel cohesive. It bridges the spiritual and the practical.
It really does. It takes the ideas from being interesting thoughts and turns them into a usable operating system for an early career.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but I think we've identified the pivotal shifts this manuscript means. We started by exploring how integrating spiritual wealth practices with practical advice risks alienating readers. We solve this by grounding mystical abundance in psychological regulation, specifically explaining the biology of nervous system regulation to overcome the physical panic of scarcity, and framing intention setting as reprogramming the brain's reticular activating system to spot hidden opportunities.
Yeah, and then we tackled the concept of generosity. Because recommending generosity to someone in acute financial distress lacks clarity if we don't break down the mechanics. So we shifted the focus from broke generosity to tactical resourcefulness. We recommended dropping the out-of-reach corporate billboard examples and elevating the highly accessible everyday examples, like the passionate hostess or the proactive video editor, to show how high-energy labor and unsolicited helpfulness are tradable economic currencies.
Finally, we addressed the jarring structural disconnect between the unglamorous survival work and the pursuit of true passion. By framing the survival seasons not as detours, but as active laboratories for building competence, we connect the daily grind directly back to healing limiting childhood money stories. The hustle becomes the empirical proof that overwrites the trauma.
If the author tightens those psychological mechanisms, swaps out the networking examples for truly accessible ones, and clearly bridges the gap between the day-to-day hustle and the long-term passion, the impact of this material will multiply exponentially. It goes from a good read to a necessary toolkit.
I couldn't agree more. We invite the listener to apply this feedback, revise the source material, and submit the work back to the critique for further review. Because at the end of the day, navigating early career success isn't just about putting your head down and grinding. It's about doing the deep psychological work required to stop letting your past dictate your potential. Keep building, keep refining, and we'll see you next time.